these migrants, I have to tell you, when they come to the southern border of the U.S., they get through on the basis that they are political refugees. They aren't. When we talk to them in the transit camp, everybody tells the same story. They are fleeing economic collapse, and they are fleeing in the direction of what they perceive to be economic opportunity. And of course, in American law, these two things are very different. We protect people who are seeking political asylum, but we do not offer automatic economic asylum. And the reason for that is fairly clear, which is that in order to protect people economically, we end up robbing Americans of their economic well-being. And that's just not something that people are entitled to, no matter how much compassion you may have for people fleeing Venezuela. It is not our responsibility, especially not without some sort of a plan, an agreement about how many people are going to come through and in what way we're going to take care of them and how that's going to get paid for. We don't do that. But in any case, you get the same story from everybody. They're fleeing an economic crisis, and they're moving north, and many of them have terrible stories about what happened to them in the Darien Gap. So that's one thing. And you see, when you go into this camp, Canam and Brio, you see the hallmark of the international community. You see NGO emblems all over the place, proudly American flags. They've paid for the water system, the toilets that are there. The United States government is facilitating this economic migration, and it's unmistakable, as is an organization called the IOM, which is the International Organization for Migration. It's a branch of the UN. And if you read their charter, you will discover that this organization believes that migration is an inherently good thing, that it's always good. And so they see it as their job to bring it about, to facilitate it. And in this case, that's particularly tragic because their desire to induce people to migrate is causing people who are woefully unprepared for the Darien Gap to try to make that journey. And the humanitarian tragedy is immense.
So the UN, of which the United States is, I think, the largest donor by far, is paying for this with the U.S. government.
Yep. Apparently they are. Now, Panamanians are largely unaware. Some are aware that there's a migration, but in large measure, this migration, once it gets through the Darien Gap, boards buses, and effectively what I now understand is that all of the countries in Central America are effectively waving the migrants through because those migrants are not going to stop in these countries. As long as they keep going to the U.S., these countries are willing to remain silent about it. Now, in 1991, Heather and I actually traveled the other direction through Central America, through all of the countries south to Costa Rica. And all of those borders are tightly controlled.
Oh, I've been, yeah.
And so it is very surprising to find those controls are effectively lifted here. That's clearly the result of a massive coordination. And, of course, it's resulting in a large migration. But what I was going to tell you about the fact that this migration doesn't appear to me to be just one thing is that we went to another camp called San Vicente. And everything in San Vicente is different than it was at Canam Mambrio. San Vicente, first of all, it's not a town. This is a camp that is built as a transit camp. It's built of containers and various objects to house people. And it is almost entirely Chinese. Now, there were Chinese folks. Chinese.
That's a long way from China.
It sure is. And what's more, in this camp, the rule that you're able to go in and walk around and talk to people is not in evidence. The Senafront, the Panamanian Border Control, actually forbid us to go into the camp. So we had to stay on the outside of it. We were also forbidden to photograph it. So what photographs we have were taken covertly. But the most striking thing...
Wait, may I ask, so is it the government of China Do you believe that's funding this?
Well, let me tell you the other thing I found, and then I think the answer to that will become clearer. Outside of the San Vicente camp, the Chinese migrants are, you can interact with them. There are a couple of shops where they go to buy water or snacks or whatever. And so you can interact with them at those places. They are the opposite of forthcoming. They have no interest in talking to outsiders. And I've been to dangerous places before. I've been to places where people fear their government and can't talk to you because they feel it's not safe. This didn't feel like that at all. This felt like people who did not want to share information because it would be a mistake to do so. And what's more, there was an incident where Michael, who has lived in China, he's been all over the world, and he started up or tried to start up a conversation with a guy who claimed to be from Korea. And Michael tripped him up and got him to speak Chinese. And then there was uproarious laughter at the fact that he had tried to pull this caper on Michael. So it is not a friendly migration. These Chinese folks who are overwhelmingly male, military age, there are women present. I realized only this morning that in thinking back, I saw few, if any, children in the Chinese migration. They were everywhere in the other places we visited, but they were not present, as far as I remember, in the San Vicente camp. So what I have pieced together, and this is a place where I'm going to speculate. This is a hypothesis. This is not a conclusion. But what I began to suspect was that the Chinese migration is actually being cloaked by the economic migration coming from South America, and that is consistent with the observation that it has some different motivation. Now, I learned from Michael that the Chinese migrants in the San Vicente camp largely bypassed the Darien. Because they have money, they can go by boat, and they can skip most of the peril of the Darien Gap. And in any case, it's a very different phenomenon. And to see it housed so separately is quite conspicuous. I do not know what the rationale for this is.
Can you estimate, do you have any sense of how many Chinese, these are Chinese nationals?
They seem to be.
How many did you see, Ish? Talking 60 or 600 or...
It's very hard to say because we were held at one edge of the camp. So I probably saw 150 faces, but the camp is deeper. Now, Michael does some drone reconnaissance, and he's also been to this camp many times. He would definitely be the person to ask in terms of a good estimate for how many of these folks there are. But the degree to which this is not consistent with well, let me back up a second. I regard the Chinese people as victims of an oppressive government that I fear for my own reasons.
For sure.
So there's nothing about the fact that these folks are Chinese that throws me. And if they were fleeing that government, I'm not sure what we should do about it, but I'm certainly supportive of their desire. I would feel a great deal of sympathy. And in fact, I felt a great deal of sympathy for all of the other migrants that I met. But the sense of, it's really hard not to use the term hostility that I felt from the Chinese was particularly unsettling, given that I know where they're headed. Right? They're headed to the U.S.
And just to be totally clear on that point, this was not a work camp for a, Chinese infrastructure project. And
no, it was not. And what I know is taking place at the southern border of the U.S. Makes this even more disturbing, because although the controls at the southern border are still there for those of us who are crossing legally, the lack of any control for those who are crossing illegally is stunning. So if I may just compare, when I came back from Panama, I approached a kiosk with my passport ready to scan it. I didn't have to. A camera took my picture, and although I didn't know that my picture was about to be taken, I hadn't taken my hat off, I was wearing my glasses, the kiosk told me I didn't need to put my passport there, and then a customs officer behind me called my name, Bret. He said, "Do you have anything to declare?" I said, "No." He said, "You're good to go." So we have technology that is capable of identifying a person with that level of ease to the point that they knew exactly who was coming through the border. But we are not apparently taking that information when people cross our southern border. What we're doing at most is asking them their name and their birth date and taking them at their word.
But no biometric collection?
Apparently not.